Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'm here representing SpedNet. I'm actually on the board of SpedNet. Before I introduce Todd, I just want to talk a little bit about SpedNet because it's kind of a unique organization. It's completely volunteer run. So it was created about 25 years ago as a nonprofit by a group of parents who felt that other parents needed help to be able to be their child's best advocate. So SpedNet is known for putting on webinars, presentations, running support groups. They have a fantastic website that's very accessible and has a lot of videos of previous presentations on various topics. And they also published an interactive guide to special services, which is really, really useful. So now, but we'll talk about Todd, because Todd has presented before for SpedNet. I think a lot of us are familiar with Todd's work. Todd Kellogg is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a board-certified and licensed behavior analyst who has worked in the field of disabilities since 1994. He specializes in providing structural family and behavior therapy to resolve challenging and maladaptive behaviors in youth and young adults. An additional area of work and expertise includes the development of social awareness and skills through individual therapy and consultations, small group settings, and within the larger community. Over the years, Mr. Kellogg has provided several workshops and trainings across a wide range of topics, including positive behavior supports, effective co-parenting, functional behavior assessments and planning, effective communications during the PPT process, social skills interventions for children with hidden disabilities, strategies to address eating-related issues, building resilience and grit in children through trial and error learning, developing healthy habits and daily routines. Mr. Kellogg currently works out of his private practice on a part-time basis while spending time on several professional projects and endeavors. So before I turn it over, I just want to make a couple of kind of housekeeping notes. First of all, as Andrea noted, we have partners. SpedNet has several partners that we want to recognize in this presentation: the Wilton Library, Wilton Public Schools, and Newtown, Sped PTA. This is an open forum, and we are going to be recording. So we just want to let folks know that, and we cannot guarantee confidentiality. So if you have any questions, you may not want to reveal your private information in your questions. The recording will be sent out to all the registrants on the email list, and will also be posted on the SpedNet website along with the PowerPoint and the other materials. This presentation is for informational purposes only and does not represent medical or legal advice. And finally, if you haven't already signed in, I know you checked in at the front desk, but we do have a sign-in sheet to be on the SpedNet email list. So if you're not on that email list already, please take a minute to sign in the back and note your email so you can get information about future programs. That's it. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Todd. Thank you.
I'm going to use this because I like to walk around. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Robin and SpedNet and Andrea and the Wilton Library. When I first got here, I don't know if anybody's ever done any presentations, but for anybody who presents, there's always a moment of anxiety when you bring your computer and you try to hook it up and get the sound going and yada, yada, yada. And everything was ready to go. So I walked in and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a presenter's dream. So I thank you for all that. So it's a pleasure. I think it's great that this is being recorded and you have the handouts and there's a few really important key documents that I'll point out to you that you definitely want to get your hands on. not just the slides, but some important articles. Okay, so this is a favorite topic of mine. The reason why it's my favorite topic, one of them at least, is because there's very few areas out there that are so well researched. This is tremendously well researched. There are very rock solid ways to help a child or an adult, whoever it might be, grow and develop better eating habits. And so that's so gratifying because we're not out there trying to figure it out as we go in this particular area. So with that in mind, I was asked to do this topic again, I don't know, maybe 6-9 months ago. So I said, all right, happy to do it. Last time I presented on this was maybe a couple years ago. So let me just do a Google search and see what's out there. If I was a parent who was having a child struggle with picky eating or selective eating, what would I be finding if I Googled it? And so sure enough, there's just a small sample. There's thousands of things you can find, but this is just 3, the first 3 that popped up. So I'll just skip around. You have this like in your slides, and you can if you wanted to search up these articles, you can. I thought this was really good here. Are you a picky eater? This is for adults right here. Like if an adult, what do you do when you have a selective eating and maybe it's getting in the way of your social life or something like that. So that's actually very helpful. And what's helpful about it is when I read it, I'm looking for some key information. Like, does a research come out into that article? Now, they might not, this is a very friendly article, so it's meant for the casual reader or observer. They're not going to reference anything as far as their research, but certain things pop out. So the number 15 in that article comes out, the number 15, and we'll talk about the number 15 later, but it says, oh, your taste palates and all that, sometimes it takes about 15 to 18 times to get used to something. Very important number. They don't tell you what's behind that number, but I will. And so that was interesting. This one here, that was a very helpful article because it kind of went into some very common sense advice, like, eating together as a family. Even if you can't all eat together, at least having one parent or an adult with a child. So like in the morning when the child, is getting ready for school, is the child eating breakfast alone, or can an adult sit down, have a cup of coffee, and just have something small with them so that they get used to the idea that this is something that we do together. And that simple proximity and being available correlates to better eating habits, but also just mixing it up a little bit, really cool ideas for those kids who are particularly rigid to even mix up the dishware. Don't always eat out of the same bowl. Don't always drink out of the same cup. The reason why, it's what's that have to do with anything? Well, believe it or not, people who tend to be picky or rigid tend to really hold on to some very environmental cues that we might not be aware of. Working with a lot of children with autism, one suggestion that you'll see later on in the slides is get rid of the original packaging of the food. If something like McDonald's French fries, now that's a bad example maybe, but honestly, the packaging, a child who particularly is very rigid around their eating or selective will grab onto that visual identity and they'll only eat out of that particular packaging. So it's you gotta do yourself a favor and get rid of the packaging and put it in a generic kind of thing. So that way you can mix and match every now and then. But I thought that was really interesting. Talked about variety is the key. Variety is the spice of life. The variety is the key. And that was, I thought that was very helpful because that is so true. Having a variety of foods, variety of different tastes. You'll see later on, I'll talk about why that's so important when you just to try something that's different or new. And so that's a very pivotal characteristic or behavior. So just branch out and introduce new foods, call different theme nights. So a lot of very helpful stuff. And then I came across this article. And this article bothered me a little bit because as I was reading it, I felt like there was an agenda behind it, like a particular model or way to go. And ultimately, at some point, you're going to have to purchase something down, if you went too far into it. The reason why it bothered me, though, is because it turned the reader away from this being a behavioral issue. It said it's not in the head, it's in the body and all that stuff, but just different language. And it referenced at the bottom, it says, click on the research. And to their credit, they referenced, I don't know, I didn't count them all, but probably 12 different articles all around the world. China, Netherlands, US, you name it. And it's like, okay, this seems like it's really credible. The one article it didn't mention though, and I searched it, and I'm gonna skip because the next two slides are just out of order, so I'm just gonna go this one right here. They didn't reference this article. This guy right here, Dr. Keith Williams. He's one of the experts in our country. He works out of the Penn State Feeding Clinic. This is a real research article. You will be able to click on this and download it. I promise you, you're going to want to read this article. Now we're going to walk through it to a certain degree. Now the thing is that he didn't include this article. I'm like, why wouldn't he include this article? This article, this research, basically sums up everything you need to know. Now the problem is what's the name of this article? Practice does not make perfect. A longitudinal look at repeated taste exposure. No one's going to Google that. Repeated taste exposure. That's too scientific. Of course, this wasn't written for the average consumer, the person who's going to Google it. This is written for research, scientists, doctors, MDs, practitioners in the field. This is what so you would never see this article most likely. And unfortunately, the person who had that website of all the other articles never even included this. And so I did this search. It's like, what are parents up against? What are parents up against? So we're going to go into this article, but you definitely want to read that. Okay, so this is a behavioral model, which is good because eating is a behavior. But let's put this in perspective. Many of you have, I'm sure all of you have children here. Or you might be here for yourself, which is fine. But the thing is that I kind of like when your kids are really young, think of like, when they're, infants, 1, 2, 3 years old, versus when they get older. If you have older children now who are teens, preteens, teens, young adults, you realize that as they get older and bigger and stronger and more autonomous and all that, your ability to influence them shrinks over time. You still influence, you're still there, right? But in the beginning of their life, you're like it, right? You have all the answers, right? Until they start pushing back. But in a way, you're it, you're the source of everything. Everything goes through you. And then they get to school eventually, and so now they have multiple sources, and so you don't have as much. You have a voice, you have a loud voice still, but now they have other voices in their life. And then as they get older, now they have peers and friends and social media, and so your influence gets a little bit smaller and smaller. It's still there, but it's less and less. Now, based on that, I think everyone can kind of appreciate that. What are the 3 areas, though, of their life that from day one, literally day one in the hospital or day one at home, what are the 3 areas behavioral areas that parents have to learn to cope with and deal? And they realize pretty soon, I said the word influence, I didn't say the word control. Now you can control your child as far as, I'm gonna pick you up here and put you over here. And when they're young enough, you're gonna wear red versus blue versus pink versus green. That's within your control until it's not. Right? But what are 3 areas from the very beginning? These 3 areas, right away, is my child. The first thing my first job was to change the diaper, right? That was my job in the hospital. And so and of course, think about it, when the kids are young, you are so attentive to their bowel movements and when they're peeing and not peeing and this or that. It's like, okay, are they not going to the bathroom? Why aren't they going to the bathroom? Why are they going to the bathroom that way? So there's all that. There's sleeping, right? How many of you wish that we were in control of their sleeping? Right? We're not. They are. We can influence, though. And then same thing with eating. Early on, I remember I wasn't a BCBA yet, but I was introduced to a behavioral technique when the child learns to latch on to the mom, if that's the course of feeding that you're going to do, that if the child's not latching on, there is a behavioral approach that they used. I won't get into it, but they used it to like, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a behavioral model. I'm seeing it right in front of me. And so these are the three things that parents can stay up at night about, right? Today, we're going to talk about the eating part of it. We can talk about the other stuff another time, but definitely the eating part of it. So get back on track. Okay, here we go. So that research article by Dr. Keith Williams, they have thousands of kids going through that feeding clinic. Now, picky eaters versus selective eaters versus challenge eaters, you Google that, you're going to see different definitions out there, right? Picky eater is a more casual, lesser extreme issue than a selective eater and so forth. Well, the Penn State feeding clinic had children, all ages, all abilities and disabilities, some of them literally with feeding tubes. That's how challenging some of the kids were that went to the think about it, if you're going to go to a feeding clinic, it has to be kind of up there, right, as far as challenge level. But as far as like, feeding tubes, that's pretty high up there. And some of it has to do with behavioral challenges or disabilities, or there was an operation and the child, I remember working with a young girl once who never had food in her mouth until a certain age in her life. And she eventually had puree food for the longest time and eventually started having some solid food like in later elementary years. But she had to learn that from new. So it's like lots of different reasons why you might have challenges around eating. But the reason why I'm saying this is because their approach, whether the child has autism, severe autism, not severe autism, sensitivities to different textures, it didn't matter. The same approach was used on everybody, and it worked on everybody. So that's I want to let you know that. You don't have to get so consumed about what is it behind this, because if you have the answer, it's going to work. Okay, so they had access to all these families coming through. So they had surveys. Okay, please answer, part of the application process and getting enrolled in the food clinic. And by the way, the clinic had services done there. They had services done at the people's homes. They were close by and all that. So they had a survey, and they answered all these questions. So this is the kind of stuff you're going to see, like, 18 to 26%. That's, you'll see something like 18 to 30% has, can be considered picky eaters, right, for children. So it's not that uncommon. Think about, 1/4, 25%. Now, if there's a disability like autism, that can jump way up, right? So 70% on average for children who are on the spectrum can have food challenges. Severity of autism doesn't matter, right? When it comes to that number, it's 70% across the board. Okay. Children will not grow out of it. You probably heard of this before. I think most pediatricians don't say this anymore, though. One of the articles that I Googled up before, said, yeah, sometimes doctors say that. They'll grow out of it. They'll try to help you not get too anxious about it. The truth is the matter is they won't. I mean, they could, but the about 50% won't on average. And, it affects them. There's, diabetes, obesity, ironically. Obesity because the foods that they gravitate towards are salty and fatty. And so that tends to, in your metabolism, doesn't always work through that as quickly. And you have less variety. And so that factors in. One of the articles that I Googled that you can look at, it was pretty, had some information about college kids who, pretty much control what they eat at this point. I mean, they did before that, but now they really get to choose. They have, those who grew up with picky eating, they, on average, had less fruits and vegetables and fiber, right? So that kind of stuff. So you want to address it at some point, even as a young adult. Okay. So when they did that survey, they asked the parents, okay, what do you feed your children? Name of stuff. And what happens when you give them something and they refuse outright? What happens then? So, what do you think how many times do you think a parent, an average situation. Don't forget now, they got themselves to the feeding clinic, so there's challenges, all right? So the person who has a child that has really picky eating, selective eating, the average parent, how many times do you think they will repeat that food if the child just outright refuses it? You want to guess? I know the answer's right in front of you. Yeah, it's 0. And you have the answer in front of you, but it's 0. And that's on average. And I thought that was remarkable. It's like, because when I was at this workshop, I know I had at least one child. I don't think I had 2 yet. But I was like, wow, 0. But then that kind of makes sense when you read further. Children who may not eat what their parents eat. So basically, what will happen is that, and you guys know this probably, right? I mean, you might have grew up this way too, to a certain degree. It's like, well, the parents will start making that second meal. Here's a kid's meal, and here's the adult meal. I mean, restaurants do it all the time, right? Of course. I mean, come on, everyone chooses what they want at a restaurant. You have a kid's menu and all that. And the kids' menus, places that you go pretty much look the same, pretty kid-friendly. But at home, if you do that, right, if you do that and you have that separate meal, or just out of convenience, we'll all eat that stuff. We'll all eat the kid-friendly stuff, so sometimes the family drifts in that way. So if you look at these things, these are just a few lines on here, but if you just stare at that for a moment, and, this impacts everybody. This right here, just these steps right here, that cements the pattern. That keeps it going. And so if the pivotal variable is child tries something novel, doesn't have to like it, doesn't have to eat more than one bite of it. Well, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Just try it. Just try it. But if that doesn't happen and this happens, well, then it's self-fulfilling at that point. So, a little bit of humor here. I love Calvin and Hobbes. I'll let you read. Can you read it? So creative. Calvin doesn't go hungry. Calvin's very smart, right? Who wouldn't do that? So Calvin doesn't go hungry, and the reason I have that up here is because, in those surveys, they found that parents, look, let's face it, you're like wired to protect and provide and to feed your children. Them going to bed hungry is not a good feeling. There's something deep, right, that kind of bothers you about that. And so, let's face it. Of course, think about the human history of survival and all that. When it really, when you really had to grow your food or hunt it or gather it or whatever, this was a big deal. This took up a lot of your time. And so to not eat what's in front of you and to go to bed hungry, that doesn't work well for a lot of people. I get it. But the reality is that might have to happen a couple times. So the real issue, trying new foods. That's basically it. Trying new foods. Okay, so this next sentence, I would have changed it, but then I would have thrown everything off because it's a little bit harsh. I'm looking at it now, I'm like, Todd, you got to soften up a little bit. Treatment for picky eating or food refusal is no different than with many other behaviors. It boils down to the child learning to follow directions, which is sitting in a chair, not leaving the table, trying small bites of food, yada, yada, yada. Okay. That comes across, as I read it now, I was like, this sounds a little harsh. It's not just about following directions, but it is about trying something. So I was like, okay, I got good news, I got really good news, and I have fantastic news, and it's going to come in that order. So here's the good news. So the good news is that number 15, remember I said it before? There it is. So the average person, now this is like not, whenever you say average, it's like, okay, already it's off. Like, what does that mean, Todd? Okay, it means that whatever sample sizes they use to figure this out, the average person has the average number of 15 times to begin to tolerate or like a food item 15 times, the average person. Okay, so not bad. Now, wait a minute. What about this following direction stuff? I'll get back to that in a second. But think about this. So just trying something. Anything we do for the very first time requires what? Whether you learn how to play golf, skiing, learn a foreign language, learn how to walk, learn how to do anything. It always requires what? One small step. That's it. None of that gets resolved right away. It's just one step at a time. And so I was like, okay, let's go further here. By the way, the following directions things, eventually, like if this is a real problem in general, you're going to have a harder time with these approaches, all of them. So this does matter, but it's not just that. It's not just that. But you definitely want to have this worked out here. I remember there's a little boy. He's not a little boy anymore. I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures later on of the different things that he eventually learned how to eat. But I met this young guy, and he was like 3 years old. And I worked with him for practically his whole life. But he was like, hey, my mom was like, he really doesn't do well at the kitchen table. I'm like, okay, what does that look like? So we get there, and this boy has significant autism, and they bring him to the kitchen table, and he's already stiffening up. And of course, he's a little guy. So this is, remember the diagram? You have a little control. You can get him there if you really want to. And he gets there, and he sits in the table, and he arches his back, and you put something in front of him, and he swipes it on the floor. I mean, it's like, and it gets worse and worse and worse. I mean, at one point, this is my first week in the home. I remember at one point, he was literally crawling. There's a giant kitchen table, crawling across, like just running, crawling across the kitchen table, like, just get me out of here. Like screaming, yelling, you name it. Like, I'm like, this isn't gonna work. There's nothing we can do. And this is before I went to this training. There's nothing we're gonna, I had some tools in my bag, but I'm like, well, this is impossible. He won't sit at the table. And why? Because, I don't know, weeks, months before I got there, this has happened every day. So I'm a big fan of Vincent Carbone. He's a well-known behavioralist. He's like, he sees a worsening condition. It's like you're about to pull on 95 and you see all the cars. You're like, oh my gosh, let me pull off. A worsening condition, get me out of here. So we had to start over with this kid completely. So he'd go to the table, and there wasn't food. There was just toys. Just toys. This table, we had to neutralize the whole table, make it nice, make it fun, yada, yada, yada. And then, to that one article, that we did that Google search, that one article said, oh, pair it with something that's preferred. That's exactly what we did. We paired it with all kinds of fun stuff. Eventually, he got to the point where he was able to be available at the table. That's not what this talks about, but but that does have to eventually happen. You have to be able to kind of have it be at the table. Okay, so this is the good news. So the good news was that you just have to try something. The really good news is that size does not matter. I'll say that again. Size of what you try does not matter. The research is very clear on this. Dr. Williams tried to impress this to the crowd of people out there in this auditorium. He goes, if I have to, I'll take a pea and I'll slice it up into 10 little pieces. And if the child only needs to eat 1/10 of that pea, so be it. It doesn't matter because it's one step. Think about it. As far as trying something, as far as literally the definition of trying something, nowhere in there does it have to 10 peas, 20 peas, a bowl of peas, even 1 pea. It's all abstract. If you just try one thing, if you get over that behavioral hump, think about everything. The child has to agree to that at that point and swallow. That's the definition. You have to swallow it. Spitting it out didn't count. Gagging doesn't count. Cut it small if you have to. Once you get past that, ding, 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 you're on your way. So I said, okay, Todd, what behavior would represent this? Like, get out of the food area. That's what behavior? I'm like thinking, well, I don't know. Like, I'm not a golfer, but I'm like, well, you know, when someone learns how to hold a golf club, I don't know. So I said, you know what? Let me think of a real good one. A right-handed person wants to learn how to throw a ball left-handed. Have you ever tried that? All right. If you're left-handed, it'd be the other way. It is, in my opinion, like impossible. It looks so silly. So let me try this. Let me try it. Let me look into this. So you look out there and you'll see stuff like, 15 minutes a day, the average person, 2 to 3 months. It's kind of a wide range there, but 60 to 90 day trials. One kid filmed himself, little short clips. This little teenager out there in the backyard. His parents must have been really proud. Like, wow, he's not in a video game. He's learning how to pitch left-handed. 150 days. That's how, little clips. 150 trials. You could see it. Awkward, like, watch out, duck your head. And then all of a sudden, like, day so-and-so, we hear a bing because he hit the pail. And eventually got to the point. So, right, he didn't have to do it all day long. It's the 150 days, not a half a day every time. That one was 15 minutes a day for 2 or 3 months. So it's all behavior. It doesn't matter what the behavior is. We're talking about eating now, but any new behavior that's challenging, right? It's repetition. It's not the size. People who study, they found that out too. If you have a certain amount of material, I tell these kids all the time, you're studying for something, you have only 4 hours. Do you spend all 4 hours at the end? Do you go 2 and 2? Do you divide it up in 30 minutes? Right? The more exposures you have, usually the better results you get. They've shown that. So it's like, we're not inventing something new here. It's about eating, and there's some emotional stuff that comes with that because it's your children. I get that. But behavior's behavior, and it's like, okay. So that was good news, I thought. The size, I thought was really good news. The good news is that there's an average versus 15, okay? We all have a number, okay? We start off with a number. Now, the really, really, really good news is that whatever that number is, so I said the average is 15. So for a young person growing up, maybe their number is 12. Maybe that person's number is 30. We all have a number that I'll get to in a second, an average number. But then for every new novel food item that you make your way through, that number goes down. Now, if that's not good news, I don't know what is. Because there's hope. There is a light at the end of this tunnel. And this is all based on this research article. So this is why this is not Googled. Who wants to Google that? Anyways, so I'm going to have a blow up of this in a second. But what do you notice about these charts? There's something in common with every one of them. What do you think it is? They all start what? On what end? On the high end, right? And on average, over time, what direction do they go? They go down. This is the opposite of what we want for the stock market, right? The stock market goes up over time. You reverse that would be the stock market over time. So the trend goes down. The trend goes down. Now what am I looking at? Okay, what you're looking at is that every dot is a food item. So this dot here is a food item. That person needed to try it one time, and they were able to tolerate or like it. That's just luck there, okay? This next food item, it took like 9 times. So every dot is a brand new food item that they eventually learn to tolerate or like. So let's look at this a little more closer. Here it is. Those 3 of those blowing up a bit. So again, food item, a new food item, another new food item. So this food item here took probably, it looks like maybe 7 times, 7 different times of trying a little bit, right? To be like, okay, No more behaviors around this. I accept this is fine. What's the test of accepting it? Not refusing it. Or if it's sitting in front of you, just, all right, I'll eat that. Boom. I'm fine with that. You know? And so here's the thing. Oops, sorry. This is fun to look at. But this is one child. This is another child. This is another child. There's a story behind every one of these, though. There's a story of perseverance behind every one of these. Because, I mean, look at this journey. They got really lucky there. I think it was one time, and they liked that food item. You jump up here, uh-oh, that took 8 times. But then imagine that family, like, oh, the second one only took like 8 times, 7 times. And this, oh, look, it's going down. Oh, that tough day. And then look at this one, 35. I don't know what that was, but it was something he didn't like or she didn't like. And whether she ended up or he ended up tolerating and liking it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. Like I just stopped refusing. Okay, you know, like me, I don't know about you guys. I like carrots. I've yet to really, I don't like artichokes. I don't know. I'll tolerate it. So you don't have to like it. Like this is not food. This is basically just getting over the hump. So, but imagine this. Come on, think about it. When they got to like 25, don't you think someone wanted to quit at that point? Because they're like, wait a minute, this is not working. Finally got to this point, they're like, this better, you know, and all of a sudden, look, reward, you know. So any data point by itself is a whole thing, but eventually the trend goes down. I told you the average number, so this kid's average number in the beginning, if you just look at that real quick, if you just took that little sample there, maybe the average is, you know, 14 for him. But it's not 14 over here. When the more times you get the lower number, you're going down. Same with this thing. Like, look how high he started. I mean, like, look, the day 1, he's just under 30. 30 times to try something, you know, different things. And then down, and they're like, hallelujah here, right? And I look at this one, I'm like, do they want to quit? Like 10 down. And then like this next one, okay, 14. Next one, 16. It's like, doctor, this is going the wrong way. It's supposed to be you told me the average was going down. Yes. Just like the stock market goes up, but depends on how far back you look. If you look at a 1 day, 2 day, 1 week, 1 month, sometimes 1 year, not big enough. You got to go back further. So you go back far enough, it will go down. So that's the good news, perseverance, getting through it. So no more of this. So I don't know about you. Half my family is from Wisconsin. I mean, we grew up in Connecticut, Easton, but not until I was 6. So before that, half my family was from Wisconsin. The other half was from Missouri. And the Missouri side, they were farmers, growers, very agricultural based, very, very like conservative based. So what do you think happened when that was put in front, something like that was put in front of me? Okay, I'm not suggesting this at all, but there was no option. You're gonna eat that, or your bottom's gonna be sore. Now that's not what we do anymore, okay? But I imagine how hard I looked like that too back then. That's like we had to get away from that. So this idea that you have to finish what's on your plate, you don't have to. Now, it's just about smallness, and over time. So, is there anything we won't put in our mouth? Depending on how you look at it, sadly, probably not. Right? For most of us, the first time you have any of that, what's it like? Is it enjoyable? The first time. I know some of this is addictive, but it's not enjoyable up front. Your taste buds are screaming, no. Right? My dad, when he was alive, he liked scotch. And after I got into my adult years, I'm like, let me try this. I to this day, I think it's gross. Now, between you and I just haven't hit that number yet. But I don't want to, because I like bourbon. I hit that number and I'm fine, right? But here's the thing, like we all have, this is for everybody. So there's really nothing that a child eventually won't tolerate or like. I don't like liver to this day. I don't care what my average number is, what it doesn't really matter. That's going to be one of those that just It's the average. So it goes both extremes. It's going to be like too high up. It's not worth it for me, right? But my wife, she does make stuffed artichokes. That's something I never grew up with. And she's half Italian. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to try this. Stuffed artichokes. You know, I don't like it as much as she does, but I tolerate it. It didn't take that long. So it's the same for all of us. So here's a thing. This is just one, like, when you download the file, this is just one way to track. You just want to track stuff down. Preferred stuff, moderately preferred, and then brand new, right? Because you want to know, you want to kind of keep track of what your child, you probably instinctively know what they like, but like, what do they like? Let's put that down, and stuff that's kind of okay with, because you're going to want a combination of things depending on what approach you want to use. So there's 3 approaches here that we're going to talk about based on the science. This first one is approach number 1. Okay? So what this is here is 5 little novel food items. They're small on purpose to represent that the size doesn't matter. And ding, 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 1, 2. They're both rewards. Come on. Let's face it. You sit down, long class, you're taking an exam or whatever it is, a hard day at work. Don't tell me that's not an award. Reward is a reward. Escape. Get me out of here. Okay. Now, at the clinic, this is the model they use a lot of, because it's a clinic, right? You sign up, you're there, you have a time slot. They got to make this efficient. So literally, this is how he described it. Now, I'm going to modernize this a little bit, because this was years ago that I went to this thing. But he's like, okay, in the first room, you have this right there. And then in the adjoining room, sometimes there's a window, you can see things that are really preferred, like a PS5 with your favorite game loaded on it, and a bowl of popcorn, which is your favorite thing, your favorite beverage. It's all there. It's party time. Party time. All you have to do is this. Now, don't forget, the kids with the challenging eating, they're there for a reason. So this doesn't go, remember, this takes a while. This approach takes a while. And the kid could be there for 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. Time's up. We'll come back. We'll start again tomorrow. It's a clinic. So you checked in a hotel somewhere. You're committed to this. You're going to work through this. So with this approach, basically it's compliance and directions, highly preferred. Teach outside of normal meals. So it's not really easy to do at home. It's hard enough finding time to have meals and sports and homework and this or that and bringing kids around. So this is not a friendly way, easy thing to do at home, but it is what they do at the clinics, right? It's a way to go. So that's approach number 1. Number 2 is a little more user-friendly. You have the novel food here and a preferred food there. And now the parent has control of the plates, right? And so first thing you do is you have 1 bite from plate A, and then you can have a bite from plate B. Takes a lot of instructional control with that, right? Because you're managing the plates. The child has to agree that you're going to be doing this to a certain point. Now, what they'll tell you is that this is pretty good though when it comes to there's greater choice, but when it comes to obesity, perhaps, because just the practice of this really slows down the eating. Because like the food you want, you're like, the food that you don't want. You can look at it a little bit. Okay, fine, boom. And then boom. And then this slows it down. But it slows it down, okay? Back and forth, back and forth. So the problem, if there's a problem, and it might be, is that you have to do this for all meals. So remember, the first one is outside of meals. This one is all meals. Why is it all meals? Well, if you don't do it all meals, I'm just going to really not eat much at this one, and I'll just load up later on with the stuff I really want. So, and this is a challenge because, at schools, if your child's really struggling and they're going to school, obviously, I mean, they would have to do this at school for this to really work. So again, some good, but some bad. Approach number 3. Here's number 3. Now, that's our novel food item, right? By size, you can tell. And these are all preferred. I like this stuff. Except, there's not a lot on the plate. In fact, that's probably 1/3 of what I normally would want to eat, what I'm normally accustomed to eating, my calorie intake. So this, in combination with locking up all the snacks, cutting down all the in-between meals, we'll get to that point. But it is something that has to be done. So that one little boy that I talked about, when we eventually really got him to eat, we had to lock up all the snacks, which was not easy to do because it was a big house, lots of places to put these things. But you had to lock them up. You had to keep it away from him because, like Calvin, he'll just eat when he's ready, when he wants to. It's something else. But in this case, if I'm not going to eat, so I'm going to eat that first, eat this second, eat that third, and then I guess I'll have to eat this to get this, right? The rest of my preferred stuff. Now, here's a funny thing. This is just anecdotal, but that one little boy, eventually when we got to this stage, we started doing this in his life when he was older. And once he figured it out, doesn't matter whether he has significant autism or not, like he figured it out. Which one of these things do you think he ate first? The less preferred. It's true. Get it out of the way. Because now when I get this out of the way, I got nothing but good stuff in front of me. Talk about, delay of gratification. That wasn't even the point of the intervention. But it's like, just get out of the way. Problem solved. Great. So this approach, the reason why this approach is so popular is because it's less stressful for the kid, less stressful for the kid, less stressful for the parent, and just one time a day, just one meal a day. Just fix it in one meal a day. Yeah. Okay, so your question is a good one. Do you put it next to each other? That depends. Because for this to work, right? Let me go back. It doesn't really matter what order he eats that in, but he cannot have that until that's gone. So, I love this. I went to law school for a reason, just for this line I wanted to give you. I didn't stay in law school. I went to psychology instead. But my favorite class in law school was property law. And you know what 90% of property law is based on? Possession. You have it, chances are the law is going to lean your way. I learned about that. Squatters, for example, you have a piece of property that you're not paying attention to. Someone illegally moves in, stays there. If a certain amount of time goes by and you do nothing, legally, they're in favor. Possession. You have an argument with somebody and that's my whatever it is. No, that's mine. And the person has it and you go to court. Unless you have some real good evidence. So, when I say all this, if that child grabs that plate before eating this, for some cases, that's already game over. Like, am I going to really into a power struggle here? So you want to avoid the power struggle. If you're going to have the power struggle, they just can't have the plate. Yeah. And you might have to go to bed hungry, like Calvin's dad. Go to bed. You might have to go to bed hungry, right? Hungrier than normal. Not starving, because you had something to eat. And eventually this will wait. Here, I'll give you an example too. After I went to this workshop, it's like a 3-day workshop, I come home and I'm like, boom, ready to go. So I didn't get to use this with any of my clients yet. So who do you think I used it on? My youngest child. He's a kid. He's just 2 years old, probably 2 or 3 years old. Young, small enough to be in a high chair. High chair, can't leave, right? So I had him in there, and I'm like, okay, because I obviously missed a lot of what was said, and over time I've come back and I was, oh, okay, this is where I messed up. I turned this into a power struggle. because I was convinced that I was right, and I just get him over this hump. You just had to have a little bit of, just a tiny little bit of, remember I said size doesn't matter? Well, just a little bit of ground beef. That's it. Just put it in your mouth, you're done. And to this day, he's very strong-willed. And so he and I were in a battle. And I don't know, must have been like an hour. My wife comes in the kitchen. She's just like, that's it. Get out. And she took him and went to bed. She took him to bed. And that was it. And I told him on the way to the bus stop this morning, I'm going to tell that story. He's like, don't say it. It's embarrassing. I'm like, they don't know who you are. He's in high school now. But the thing is that what I forgot was you don't have to do it all in one day. If it doesn't work out today, we'll just do it tomorrow. Because the science is on my side, is on your side. Is once they start to try something, they'll get it. And you know what? It doesn't have to be today. If I'm not feeling good, you're not feeling good, or we got locked into a battle, let's just call it and just go. Yeah. Excellent question. So when you go, the question is, do you stick to one food? Okay, so you could if you want to. You keep track here, like something like this. Keep track, right? So if you really dive into the research, I think they kind of come up with a number of how many days go by that's too long, before it doesn't, so I don't know that number, to be perfectly honest. I haven't gone back and looked at that. But in very practical terms, you probably don't want to start with more than 2 or 3 and just rotate them through. Doesn't have to be every single day, right? Time's on your side as long as you give yourself enough time, right? Think about it. It's like you don't have to, it's over time. And so it's funny too, because I just knew based on all this research and just my own work with my clients that it's just trying it is the biggest thing. So even with my own kids, like I just want them to try stuff. That's all and they realize that dad's gonna leave me alone as long as I just try this thing. And now that they're older, I am so impressed that they try things that I never would even suggest that they would. So that's cool. I think it's over time. It's just, yeah. Okay, great question. So you have kids 3 different ages, young 9 months, and then 5 and 7. Okay. So really, when you think about it, think of it as a very holistic approach. Think about culture, family culture. What's our culture at our table? What do? We try things. That's it. We just try things. And so, when you make something like a new dish, the expectation is we're just going to try it, and it's just a tiny bit. And that's, and if you want to start slow and say, look, dessert is, you might have different feelings about dessert. Dessert doesn't have to be cake, right? It could be anything. Some kids like a little bowl of cereal before they go to bed, or, like a little Jell-O, whatever it doesn't matter. But it could be something where, hey, we try things here just a little bit. And look, mommy tries it. I did. We all different try it. Oh, good. Let's say one of the kids tries it. Awesome. And celebrate that. That might be good enough. At some point when you have that dessert, you're like, look, anybody could, we just try it. And then of course you can have your dessert later if you want, something like that. Without making it negative, you just want to encourage them. Hey, this is what it's all about. You don't have to use that model. It's more like an approach. Because once they all start to pick up on it, and kids are funny, when their sister or brother start to try something and they get celebrated and a big deal, and they get to sit and maybe have a special seat. I remember growing up, one of my classes, the teacher said, okay, that back table with a really cool table with a big chair, that's for the 2 kids in class who are doing the best this week. Maybe you have a special status for people who try things at home. Celebrate it. Have a name on the board, have a star next to every time you try something. Mom, dad, all of us, boom. Grandma comes over, whatever. You do that, and it's pretty soon they start to get, starts going that direction for you. Okay. Do that, and I'm sure the 9-month will be the best eater. Okay, so that boy, the one boy I talked about a few times. This was his diet pretty much. So, this is well past him. When he was fighting and screaming and leaving the table, That was when he was really young. This is more like probably third, fourth, fifth grade. And, he got to the point where he really settled in on these kind of food items. He had more than this, but what do you notice about those food items? It's not so much taste. They're white. Yeah, they're very light in color. They're white, aren't they? People grab onto this to some variable. Out of all 5 senses, so in that research clinic, when they do the survey and they test out this or that, my child has some tactile defenses, they have this diagnosis, that diagnosis, they have oral motor challenges, really anxiety. So out of all those things, which of the 5 senses do you think registered as the most significant as far as it correlated with the most resistance when it comes to behavior, like resisting food? Which do you think? Smell, taste? What do you think? Sight. How did you know that? Does it say that somewhere in the slides? Do you work in a restaurant? Yeah. Sight, visual. Now, the other ones are important, but visual, it's so wired into our brain. So I remember working when I was in my 20s and 30s in grad school in some of these really nice high-end restaurants. The chefs spent all their time, right, on the front, making sure that plate goes out. It looks gorgeous. The last thing you want is something to look messy, sloppy, not appetizing. So anyways, but he was really into these 4 things and more. Okay, so we did approach number 3, just one meal a day. This guy ate probably 6 meals in one day. Huge grazer. And so you're like, well, remember he had to pull back? So we had to do a little bit of that. But nowadays he's a grazer. But look what he eats. Look what he eventually started eating over time. This is post. So this is I was like, oh, I gotta take pictures of these things, this wide variety of food. Not one at a time, but one bite at a time, right? Like mom introduced this every so often, rotating in and out. The point is eventually, remember, he's the kid that eventually just figured it out real fast. Let's just put this in my mouth and get to move on. So that was, when that happened, we realized, in hindsight, it's 2020, it's like, bing, 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 that's it. He's gonna try it, we're on our way. It's just over time, because we all have our number. Eventually, he starts actually liking some of those things he tries. Now, will he actually eat something that he just tolerates? To a certain degree, perhaps. But whether he likes it, for this guy, more of a factor. I mean, you look at I like the colors, just to pop out the vegetables. The cool thing about this for me was his mom had she had 4 kids, one of them significantly autistic. And she really put a lot of effort into cooking. That was her passion. She was very good at it. Her family really appreciated it. She got a lot of value out of it. So the fact that this one guy, 1 out of 4, would eat this stuff was a big deal to her. It was just like a big deal, Keep going through. The hot dogs are still there. It's okay. I just had a chili dog the other day, so who cares, right? I like that one because that's kale. That was not initially on the list. Kale. So that was good stuff. Okay, so helpful hints. So the research also shows this stuff. Some of this might be pretty self-explanatory, but I don't know. Eat on schedule when possible. It just improves eating habits. Eating on schedule. Think about the routine across the week. If it's too varied, too off the charts, not predictable, that can complicate things. Associate eating with sitting at the kitchen table or somewhere. So, all right. It's like, people, I think of this like a homework in some ways. If you look up what's good homework habits? Well, the kid, proper lighting, proper, posture, sitting down at a desk or a table, less distraction, all good stuff. Okay, but how do you explain to kids sometimes who can listen to music and still get A's while doing his homework? Or the kids who do their homework in bed? Don't raise your hand. But I know people who have kids who do their homework in bed. I'm like, that, to me, growing up, that's just like, I don't know. I never liked that. The proof is in the pudding, though. Why though eating at the table? Because if you're failing your classes and you're not having good homework hygiene, you probably have to really correct that. If you're having a hard time eating or struggling with trying things, the environment does matter. And you want the table to be a place like that first boy who ran from the table, eventually had to get him to like want to be at the table. Being at the table is important, like things like that. And, so like timing, place, certain rules, like, it's hard. Like, think about a classroom. If the teachers and someone just keeps getting up out of their chair over and over and over again, eventually the teacher's going to have to turn around and help that child kind of like stay a little bit more. It's different if they have ADHD and they have to get up and walk a little bit. I mean, you have those breaks, that's fine. But you have to look at your environment at home, and if it's too unpredictable, you will probably want to start working on that first. Like, okay, we sit at the table first, we finish our meal, then we go. Or we want a break, that's fine, you come back. But you have to have some kind of like routine or structure. Number 4 is a big one. So just like Calvin, you really have to, the child, all of us, will find our calorie intake one way or another if we can. So if you really want to make this work, if you're wondering, like, why are they putting up such a fight over this? It's just one little food item. Why, Todd didn't say they would take this long, whatever. Don't forget some of those charts, right? But the point is that if they're coming home and they're having too many snacks, or they get to have a snack after dinner or this or that or whatever, or they pile up on something else, they're just going to satiate, and it's less of an issue. So being hungry, in behavioral circles, they call that establishing operations or setting events. It's a big deal. Being hungry is a big deal as far as like conditioning a child to have the most higher probability of success. So yes, you have to cut back on the snacks. I mentioned the packaging before, and that's for your child. That might be an important thing. Mixing up the plates a little bit, not getting so stuck on something, which would be good. Okay. So regardless, gagging. So this is always kind of a tough one, because gagging, I think if you're a parent, it kind of makes you nervous. Like, you're gagging, you don't choke, and kind of stuff. So gagging can be considered a involuntary, right, reflex, like a behavior. Voluntary behavior, I do it on purpose. Involuntary behavior, I don't. So a long time ago, an involuntary behavior would be my legs doing this when I'd be like talking in front of people. Like, I couldn't stop it. I wanted to. Like, okay, give me something to stop that. So what stopped it? Repetition over time, just like all behaviors. So with this one, gagging, tough one. Anxiety, food sensitivity, tactile defenses, whatever they are, the formula is still the same. Go smaller, go smaller. If you gagged on that thing, I'll just make it even smaller. So, and it's just, as long as it goes down, try to stay away from washing food down, because it's like a little bit of a shortcut. But the problem with that is that you think success, drink that. But if that's what you have to do every single time, you're kind of like, the child's not fully experiencing the trying of the food. So that's the tricky thing. Medication is different, obviously. Medication, by the way, is the same thing. I had children who worked with, he's like, Todd, they won't take their meds. And it's a long, if you can get it, you get those little capsules, right, that are from the pharmacy that are empty, fill them up with something that's obviously non-toxic, baking soda, something like that, and you just have them learn over time to start taking a little tablet. Same approach, but of course you drink with that. So with this, it's okay to have a drink afterwards and all that, and you don't make a big deal of it, but watch it, because ultimately you're like, okay, that's good, but this next time do that small bite without the water, or count to 10, whatever, just to get over that hump. But gagging, it's like, okay, get yourself feeling better, and it's like, it might be really harsh. You might think it's harsh, but it's like you go back, if you're using this approach real quick, it's like, I want you to have this. You just have, I'll cut that even smaller, and then you can have that plate. And if you want to try tomorrow, that's fine. But, it just takes time. It just takes time. That's tough. The gagging part's tough. Vomiting, maybe even tougher. But the thing is that remember, the nice thing about it is, I think, what I find reassurance is that in the research article in the feeding clinic, they've seen it all. They've seen everything, right? And it's just a matter of repetition. Just like learning to throw a ball left-handed. You're not going to do it in one day. It might take 2 or 3 months. It took this one boy 180 days, whatever it was, days. It's like, it will happen. You'll have time on your side as long as you give yourself enough time. And just stick with it. Stick with it, stick with it. You threw up, okay, we'll take a break. If you get hungry later, like, okay, dinner's at 5. You threw up at 5:15. Get yourself relaxed. We'll watch a show, whatever it is. When you're hungry, let me know. We'll go back. I'll make that even smaller, and then you can have the rest of your dinner be like. It's like it's like you avoid the power struggle, but you have to hold to the model. Otherwise, God forbid, they learn that vomiting gets them out of it, and that will happen, right? If you be careful, it could happen, right? So any kind of maladaptive behavior that gets you out of a stressful situation, that looks like anxiety, right? And so you gotta be careful with that. One funny story. So I work with a variety of kids. I have a smaller practice now, part-time, because I'm doing some other stuff. But my latest example in this was I work with this boy, and he's 22. So we started this when he was 20. I remember we did something similar with the COVID shot. Think about he had to get a COVID shot. This was a couple years ago, and vaccine. And so it was all about, okay, well, how, at the time he was working through his eating, and so we're like, it's very similar to that. Start small and all that, and we'll just start with a little pretend thing, and just work our way up. But anyways, this family, I remember, I just felt like I had to help them because they're an English family, which makes them especially lovely people. And I remember the mom's story. They go back home to visit mom in England. They're around in England, and their boy has moderate autism, high-functioning autism. But before we started to do anything, he had a very restricted diet. And, they were like, it was late at night, just try the fish and chips, and he wouldn't have it. And his go-to food was pizza, maybe 3 times a day, twice a day for sure. And she's like, Todd, you can't find a pizza place. And they're running around, driving themselves crazy. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. Once you're back at home, we get back at home now, let's come up with a list. He will just have a little sample. And, the long story short, he's on a 3 or 4 different food items now. And who knew? Mozzarella sticks aren't that bad. So, but it wasn't in his diet. But you see the similarity, though, right? But the point is that, cheeseburger and this or that, and, chicken tenders, that's not really healthy eating yet, but he's just got to try stuff and realize that, okay, I tried something, it's okay. And then build from there, build from there. And most importantly, the family won't get stuck next time they're on vacation, without any alternatives. So, all right. So now we're at a point where we have any kind of questions, any thoughts.